Fighting games have traditionally been bad at teaching you how to play them. In the 10 years that I've been playing fighting games, I've had many questions that the games themselves were unable to answer. Some games had basic tutorials that only taught the controls and mechanics. Other games had extensive tutorials that ended up being dry. Some games didn't even have tutorials. For the longest time, the best way to get better at a fighting game was simply by playing it more. With that said, it does help if you start with a simple character. In Street Fighter, that character is Ryu. Ryu is a character recommended for those new to Street Fighter. He has no gimmicks, no confusing mechanics, and no overly complicated combos. His special moves are simple and have parallels in other fighting games. If you can do a Shoryuken, you can do a Volcanic Viper, or an Updo, or a Tiger Fury. As the first selectable character on the roster, he's also the character that the game itself wants you to play first. However, that has changed with the introduction of Luke. Although he first appeared as a DLC character in Street Fighter V, Luke has become Street Fighter's new mascot, as of Street Fighter VI. He's essentially the modern version of Ryu, with a moveset that is incredibly similar to Ryu's, but adjusted in ways that make him more appealing to use. Ryu is still in the game, but he's no longer the character you're expected to learn Street Fighter with. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first game where Ryu isn't the first selectable character on the roster is the game with Ryu's largest moveset yet, with 2 new special moves and 1 brand new super. With that in mind, this video isn't just going to focus on the Street Fighter VI iterations of Ryu and Luke. In fact, it's not going to focus on any iteration in particular. This video is going to focus on the fundamental aspects of these characters that have stayed the same across all the Street Fighter games. Luke may only have appeared in 2 games, but a lot of things that apply to Ryu apply to Luke as well. This video was scripted before the release of Street Fighter VI and its character guides, so there may be some overlap between the information in those guides and the information in this video. With that said, I've done my best to avoid talking about things covered by the tutorials present in the game's demo, as I imagine most of you watching will have completed those tutorials already. I hope that by the end of this video, you'll be able to apply what you've learned here to the Street Fighter game of your choice, and then seek out more specialized guides. After all, this isn't a guide on how to play Ryu and Luke at the highest level. This is a beginner's guide to Ryu and Luke in Street Fighter. Okay, before I start, I'd like to clarify something. In this video, I'm going to be using the words normals and buttons a lot. These just mean normal attacks performed with a single button press, i.e. your punches and kicks. It means I don't have to say punches and kicks all the time. Similarly, I'll be referring to special moves as specials. Speaking of which, let's start by looking at Ryu and Luke's special moves. In every Street Fighter game, and I mean every single Street Fighter game, Ryu has had the same 3 special moves: the Hadouken, the Tatsumaki Senpukyaku, and the Shoryuken, also known as the Rising Dragon Punch. Luke's moveset is very similar, with a projectile called Sandblast, a strike move called Flash Knuckle, and a rising uppercut called, well, Rising Uppercut. For the sake of brevity, I'll refer to Hadouken and Sandblast as Fireballs, Shoryukens and Rising Uppercuts as DPs, and Tatsumaki Senpukyakus as Tatsus. Anyway, just by looking at these moves in action, you get a decent idea of what they do. That's one of the reasons why these characters are good for beginners. Their specials are simple. Now, although they are simple, they each have depth to them. See, fireballs don't just deal damage after a hit, they deal damage when blocked too. Okay, sure, they don't technically deal damage in Street Fighter VI, but they drain your drive gauge, and once that's empty, then they start dealing damage. This damage chipping away at your health incentivizes people to dodge the fireball, usually with some move that nullifies or evades fireballs. However, many players will try to jump over the fireball instead, since jumping attacks can lead to high damage combos afterwards. It's very tempting to jump when fighting Luke in particular, since his fireball is so fast that it can actually invalidate moves that counter traditional fireballs like Hadoukens. If Luke's fireball just sounds like a straight upgrade to Ryu's fireball, keep in mind that Luke's fireball has limited range, and Ryu is somewhat able to move whilst his Hadouken is still on screen. Anyway, regardless of which character you pick, if you have a fireball, expect people to jump on you. And DPs are pretty good at hitting jumping opponents. With just these 2 moves, you can use a basic strategy of throwing fireballs to stop people getting closer and waiting for them to preemptively jump on you. If they've jumped and you didn't throw a fireball, you're free to hit them with a DP. unless you're playing Street Fighter 3 or the Alpha games. Now, as you play like this, you'll learn that sometimes you'll throw a fireball just as the opponent jumps on you, or you'll wait for them to jump and they just won't jump. That's just something you'll get better at over time, as you get a feel for when people jump and when they don't. However, there's another problem that isn't so obvious.
Horrible!
The motion input for a DP is more finicky than the inputs for your other specials, and this can be a problem if you need to land a DP in a pinch. See, the motion begins with a forward direction. If you're retreating from your opponent and they jump, you need to suddenly input the opposite direction and finish the motion. When this happens, you run the risk of getting hit before you can complete the motion. Thankfully, DPs aren't the only way to deal with jumping opponents. Every character on the roster has at least one move, normal or special, designed to hit jumping opponents. These are called anti-airs, and Ryu and Luke have a few. Besides DPs, both characters can use Crouching Heavy Punch to hit jumping opponents that are close. For further ranges, Ryu can use Standing Heavy Kick, whilst Luke can use Back plus Heavy Kick. Now if your opponent tries to jump whilst you're backing up, you only need to press a button and a direction to hit them. For that reason, I'd recommend learning to use these anti-airs instead of thinking you should only use DPs. With that said, it's worth learning to use DPs as well. They cover both ranges that your other anti-airs do, whilst dealing more damage, knocking the opponent down instead of onto their feet, and generally being a way more satisfying move to land. They also have something that normals don't: invincibility. When you do a Shoryuken or Rising Uppercut, there's a brief period where you are invincible to attacks. This can be invincibility against all attacks, or invincibility against certain types of attacks, like throws or jumping attacks. This invincibility makes it easier to anti-air your opponents without getting hit in return. If you've ever been hit by a move like this despite your jump attack clearly making contact, it's probably because that move was invincible. This invincibility even helps when your opponent is grounded. If your DP has full invincibility, you can use it to interrupt your opponent's offense and knock them down. It's a useful option, but you're left wide open if you miss or if it gets blocked, so don't throw them out without thinking. Last but not least, there's Ryu's Tatsus and Luke's Flash Knuckles. These moves serve similar purposes. They knock the opponent down and leave you close enough to them to continue your offense. However, this is also where their special moves differ from each other the most. Tatsus are simple. You send people flying and travel a set distance, depending on which kick button you press. Flash Knuckles are a bit more diverse. A heavy Flash Knuckle sends the opponent flying and makes you move forward like Tatsus do. However, the light version barely moves you at all, and the medium version doesn't even knock the opponent down. This seems a little odd, but these differences make more sense when you consider Flash Knuckles' charging mechanic. If you hold down the punch button when doing a Flash Knuckle, instead of releasing it straight away, you'll do a powered up version. A charged light knuckle launches the opponent even higher, and a charged medium knuckle sends them flying into an invisible wall. Both of these attacks let you combo afterwards, which you can't do with the regular version. Charged heavy knuckle doesn't lead to new combos, and it's hard to combo into it, but it deals more damage and once again is way more satisfying to land. The uncharged versions might sound useless now, but bear in mind that charged Flash Knuckles are slower. You can combo light attacks into uncharged light knuckle, but not into charged light knuckle, for example. So, with just this one move, you have the choice of a reliable way to end combos from light buttons, a launcher that leads to damaging combos, a combo ender that lets you maintain offensive pressure after that launcher, a slower launcher that leads to even more damaging combos, a slower but more damaging combo ender, and an even slower combo ender that deals the most damage of all. As if that wasn't enough already, Street Fighter 6 added another layer to this mechanic: perfect timings. If you hold the punch button and release it at just the right time, Luke will yell, and the attack will change ever so slightly. This leads to even more combo routes. For example, after a perfect light knuckle, you can land a follow-up from EX Avenger, something you can't do with a fully charged light knuckle. Anyway, those are your 3 special moves. Now it's time to look at Oh wait, Hydro, what about that Avenger move you just mentioned? Also, doesn't Ryu have 3 more moves? Fireballs and DPs form the backbone of Ryu and Luke's playstyle. Throwing fireballs, goading people into jumping, and then hitting them with a DP has been a surprisingly solid strategy for over 30 years. Mostly. In fact, it's something that the Street Fighter 6 tutorials encourage you to do. Still, I imagine it's not the most appealing strategy in a genre known for flashy combos and generally doing cool things. In fact, it sounds pretty lame. Cool or not, it's still an effective way to win, and at the end of the day, a W is a W. Actually, it's more like a VV, or a VP, sometimes even a PP. But I get it, this is a fighting game. Surely you should be getting up close to fight, right? Why should you stay back and deal tiny bits of damage with fireballs when you can fly in with a Tatsu or Flash Knuckle and knock your opponent on their ass instead? The answer is risk versus reward, and to explain that, I'm going to talk about a little something called frame advantage. I know this is a beginner's guide, and frame advantage seems like an advanced concept, but trust me, knowing frame advantage in fighting games is like being able to read sheet music when playing a musical instrument. So, what is frame advantage? When one character attacks another, each character goes into a state where neither player can move until that state ends. For the attacker, this state is the recovery animation, the period between the attack landing and the end of the move's animation. For the defender, it's either block stun or hit stun, depending on whether they blocked the attack or got hit. Frame advantage is when you compare the attacker's recovery animation to the defender's block stun or hit stun and see which character is allowed to move first. You are looking at frames of animation to see who has the advantage. You'll often see the frame advantage of a move written as a number, either positive or negative. If it's positive, the person using the move can move first. If it's negative, the defender can move first. So let's say you use a move that is +2 when blocked, and then both you and your opponent do an attack that comes out in 4 frames. Being +2 means you get to move 2 frames sooner than your opponent. In this instance, by the time they're on the first frame of their attack, you're on the 3rd frame of yours. 1 frame later and bam, you hit them before they can hit you. It doesn't matter how fast the defender pressed the button. If the move itself isn't fast enough to outspeed the attacker's move, it's not going to work. Now, this mainly applies to small differences in frames, like being +1 or -2. Things get interesting when the frame numbers go past 3 and -3, because normal attacks in Street Fighter can come out as quickly as 3 frames. If your opponent blocks a move and you land another move before their block stun ends, they're forced to block that move too. This is called a block string. If you hit your opponent and then use an attack that comes out before your opponent's hit stun ends, you'll get a combo. A simple way to do this with Ryu and Luke is to land a crouching medium punch, then a standing light kick. Their crouching medium punches leave them at +5 on hit, and their standing light kicks come out in 5 frames. As long as you're in range, it's guaranteed to be a combo. When you time hits like this instead of cancelling one move into another, it's known as a link combo. Now, just as there are guaranteed hits when you're plus enough on hit, there are also guaranteed hits when you're minus enough on block. Take crouching heavy kick for example. When it's blocked, it leaves you at a large frame disadvantage, somewhere around -11. That's 11 frames where you can't do anything, including blocking. If your opponent uses a move that comes out in 11 frames or less, you're guaranteed to get hit. These guaranteed hits after large frame disadvantage are called punishes, and this is why you shouldn't throw out Tatsus and Flash Knuckles. In Street Fighter 6, all of Ryu's Tatsus and Luke's uncharged Flash Knuckles are punishable after being blocked. This is known as being unsafe on block. In Street Fighter 5, Luke's Heavy Knuckle is -2 and is the only knuckle that can't be punished. This is known as being safe on block. Just throwing out unsafe moves like Tatsus and Flash Knuckles just isn't a good idea because the damage you get from landing one is greatly outweighed by the damage you take when it's blocked and punished. It's like going all in poker. It's satisfying when it works, but it's a big risk to take, and competent players can and will punish you for doing it if you do it without thinking. You could argue that this doesn't apply to medium and heavy charged knuckles, which are safe and plus on block respectively. In fact, charged heavy knuckle seems to be designed for this use, given how limited its use in combos is. Even so, if you use them over and over, your opponent will eventually start waiting for you to do them and will then counter them on reaction. They aren't something to rely on consistently. You can't just throw out Ryu and Luke's other forward moving specials either. Ryu's high blade kick and both follow-up attacks from Luke's Avenger are unsafe on block and punishable. Ryu and Luke are just not designed to rush at their opponents like this. Street Fighter has its share of characters that can throw out specials and get in safely, but Ryu and Luke are not those kinds of characters. They are balanced characters with no extreme strengths or weaknesses, jacks of all trades, masters of none. If they could easily start offense while still having an effective defense and no weaknesses, they'd be jacks of all trades,
rulers of everything.
It's not like they shouldn't get close to their opponents at all. They have the right tools for a decent offense, like an overhead attack to open up players that crouch block. It's just that they don't have any easy, reliable ways to get close. Most of the time, it's best to throw fireballs and wait for a good opportunity. With that said, you can't rely on just fireballs all the time. As I mentioned earlier, some characters have moves that evade or nullify fireballs. Even if they don't, it gets harder to throw fireballs if they're close enough to hit you before your fireball comes out. That's why it's worth taking a look at your other moves. When you're not throwing fireballs, one move you absolutely should be using is Crouching Medium Kick. This move is as much of a staple of Ryu's moveset as his special moves are. It's been in every game and it's never stopped being useful. It's one of Ryu's furthest reaching attacks, it hits low, and it can be cancelled into any of your specials. This all applies to Luke's Crouching Medium Kick too. You'll often see people cancel it into a fireball because it carries the lowest risk of Ryu and Luke's specials, whilst also being a combo on hit. It's technically punishable on block, but the frame disadvantage is relatively low, and both the medium kick and fireball will push the opponent away from you. As long as you're not doing this at point blank range, it's very hard to punish this. It's less rewarding than cancelling into other specials, but it's the safest choice and it's what you should do the most. This is just when you use Crouching Medium Kick on its own though. In Street Fighter 4, 5 and 6, you can link into Ryu's Crouching Medium Kick from other buttons, allowing you to safely use other specials. Now, which special should you use to end your combo? In terms of sheer damage, your DP is your best bet. It deals the most damage out of your specials, and outside of Street Fighter 2 and the Alpha games, it can be cancelled into supers. Unfortunately, it has the shortest range of your specials, so if you're cancelling into it from further ranges, it's likely you'll deal less damage, or completely miss. This is where your Tatsus come in handy. At the cost of dealing a little less damage, these moves connect from further ranges. They also push the opponents closer to the corner than DPs do, whilst keeping you close enough to continue your offense. With Luke, it's hard to link into Crouching Medium Kick, but you should still think about what special to end your combos with. In fact, it's the same principle as Ryu. Your DP has high damage but limited range, whilst Flash Knuckle is the less damaging but more reliable choice. Anyway, back to Ryu and Luke's other noteworthy moves. Crouching Heavy Kick has great range and knocks the opponent down instantly, but as mentioned before, it's very negative on block. This isn't much of a problem outside of Street Fighter 5 and 6 though, since it pushes the opponent out of attack range. Standing Medium Kick, well, this one, isn't cancelable and doesn't have the largest reach, but it still reaches further than other buttons and can hit the opponent in situations when crouching buttons can't. Both light kicks are useful buttons too. They reach further than light punches, and at least one of them will be cancelable. In older games, it's usually crouching light kick, and you can do stuff like this. In newer games, it's standing light kick, and you can do stuff like this. Now, a lot of what I've said here applies to other characters, so let's look at the stuff that's unique to Ryu and Luke, starting with Ryu's hop kick. In Street Fighter 6 and the Alpha games, Ryu has this hop kick move, done by inputting forward and medium kick or heavy kick, depending on the game. Sometimes it's plus on block, sometimes it's special cancelable, but it's always useful for going over low attacks. In fact, Street Fighter 6 teaches you this in its tutorials. Then there's forward plus heavy punch. This command normal is slow, but it lets you link into other moves on hit. With Ryu, you usually have enough time to land a medium or heavy punch and then cancel that into a special. I say usually, because in Third Strike, your options are far more limited. It's much more useful in Street Fighter 2, because it moves you forward quickly in a game where forward dashes hadn't even been invented yet. As for Luke's forward plus heavy punch, you don't get as much frame advantage on hit, but you do get some very easy follow-ups with target combos. Target combos are unique combos performed by pressing certain buttons in succession. Both Ryu and Luke have them, but Luke's are way more useful. In Street Fighter 6, you can follow up Luke's forward plus heavy punch by pressing heavy punch again, then cancelling that into a special move. It's ultimately the same idea as linking from Ryu's forward plus heavy punch, but the target combo gives you a lot more leniency with your timing, and overall feels easier. You couldn't do this in Street Fighter 5, but instead you could reliably link your forward plus heavy punch into his light punch, medium punch, heavy punch target combo. It's actually surprising how consistently this works, because light punches typically don't have this much range. As a result, the light punch on its own is also an effective move for interrupting your opponent's offense. Just keep in mind that the Light Punch is negative on block, and the target combo follow-up is punishable on block. You've almost reached the end of the guide, but before I wrap things up, there's one more section I'd like to cover. It's a bunch of things that I couldn't fit into the other sections, but still thought were worth mentioning. This is the lightning round. I didn't talk much about EX and overdrive moves, because for the most part, Ryu and Luke's EX moves exist just to deal more damage in combos. There are two exceptions to this. EX fireballs hit twice and knock the opponent down. If you're anticipating a fireball from your opponent, you can throw one out to eat through their fireball, knock them down, and give you time to approach or safely throw out another fireball. In Street Fighter 3, 5, and 6, your EX DPs are your only fully invincible reversals, outside of supers. I also skimmed over Ryu and Luke's other specials because they're really not useful outside of combos. Luke's Avenger feels like a gimmicky move. You could catch someone off guard with the overhead attack 1 or 2 times, or power through the odd fireball with the EX version, but both attacks are unsafe and really aren't attacks to use frequently. Hashogeki fills a similar role to Hadouken does at the end of combos and block strings. Denjin Charge buffs both of these moves, making them deal more damage and knock the opponent down. However, Denjin Charge pairs particularly well with Hashogeki, since it keeps the opponent in the air long enough for a high blade kick follow-up. This means you can do stuff like this. Sick. Remember how I said earlier that an all-rounder character with strong offense, effective defense, and no weaknesses would be too strong? Yeah, that's basically Luke in Street Fighter V. His fireballs are even better than in Street Fighter 6. Many of his buttons have great range and can convert into knockdowns, and his average damage output is higher than most characters on the roster. If you're interested in learning more, Total Sagat made a breakdown of Street Fighter V Luke on his channel, and Brian F made a breakdown of that breakdown on his channel. Let's just hope Luke doesn't end up too strong in Street Fighter 6. Oh, and one more thing. In Street Fighter Alpha 2 and 3, the custom combo mechanic allows for more aggressive sequences and long combos than Ryu is normally capable of. Or you can do stuff like this. And with that, you've reached the end of the guide. I hope you've learned something new about these characters and have a better idea of how to use them. Maybe you'll try out the DP and fireball strategy. Maybe you won't throw out punishable moves so much. Maybe you just know what -2 on block means now. In any case, thank you for watching this guide on Ryu and his hot-headed counterpart. Or at least, one of his hot-headed counterparts.
Don't expect me to be a pushover.